Welcome to the deep dive. You sent over some really compelling material this time. It paints a surprisingly detailed and frankly concerning picture of what's happening with the American diet.
It does, yeah. The information you've provided, it really lays bare some stark realities about how we're eating as a nation.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're jumping straight into it. The shocking truths, I guess, about the American diet, based on this, well, extensive collection of articles, research, notes you shared, we're going to unpack the impact of all that sugar, the sheer volume of processed food, and, the saturated fats that just seem to be everywhere.
Hmm.
You're essentially telling me the average American eats enough added sugar each year to fill a small bathtub. That really puts it into perspective.
It really does. And how normalized that's become, and how it's likely affecting our energy, our health, long term.
And it's a conversation that's, well, urgently needed when you look at the statistics.
Definitely.
Absolutely. The numbers are frankly alarming. We're talking about, what, 42.4% of American adults obese in 2024? That's according to the CDC.
Yeah, over 4 in 10 adults.
And the American Heart Association, they reported just last year that diet-related diseases are contributing to over 700,000 premature deaths every single year. That's just a staggering toll.
It is. And it just underscores the gravity of it all and why, understanding the root causes is so critical.
Which is exactly our mission here. We want to understand what's fueling this crisis. We'll look at some expert insights. You mentioned Dr. Mark Hyman's work. And importantly, we're going to explore if dietary change is actually possible, because the material you shared even includes this really interesting personal account, right? A week-long journey to healthy eating.
Yeah, a real-world attempt.
So we have this stark picture. Before we get to those maybe paths forward, let's really dig into the core drivers.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this recipe for disaster, as one of the articles called the current American diet. What are the key ingredients in this unhealthy mix?
Well, the text highlights a diet that's heavily skewed towards red meat, refined grains, and just a huge amount of added sugars, often, high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
And at the same time, there's this concerning lack of the good stuff, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, the very foods we know protect our health.
And the data really drives that point home. I was struck by the sheer volume. I mean, 152 pounds of added sugar per year. That's the USDA number for 2024.
Yeah, that's our even picture.
42 gallons of sugary drinks or something crazy like that. And then 2,000 pounds of processed foods annually, also USDA. It's almost incomprehensible.
It is. And then you contrast that with the facts that only, 10% of adults are actually hitting the recommended fruit and vegetable servings each day. The CDC says 5 to 13 servings.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that.
Yeah, it's a stark imbalance. Absolutely. So it's clear high sugar consumption is a massive issue. One article called it a sweet but deadly habit, which honestly feels pretty accurate.
It does. Sugar is just so pervasive. It's not just the obvious things like candy and soda. It's hidden in, almost everything processed. Sauces, cereals, yogurt.
And the numbers on daily intake are just, wow. 17 teaspoons of added sugar a day on average. That's way, way above what the American Heart Association recommends, right? 6 for women, 9 for men.
Exactly. That 2024 study in the Journal of Nutrition pointed that out clearly. And those extra teaspoons, they have significant consequences, both short-term and long-term.
Right. So immediately we're looking at those blood glucose spikes and crashes. Can you explain what's happening there? Why does that matter so much day to day?
Sure. So when you eat a lot of sugar, your blood glucose shoots up really fast. You get that temporary energy boost, that rush.
Yeah, the sugar high.
Right. But then it crashes just as quickly as your body scrambles to regulate it. This up and down, this fluctuation, it leads to energy dips, irritability, mood swings. And that 2023 study in psychosomatic medicine, it linked high sugar diets to a 23% higher likelihood of depressive symptoms. It really highlights that connection between, what's on your plate and how you feel mentally.
23% higher. That's significant. Does the study suggest it's directly causing it, or is it more correlation?
Well, it's a strong correlation. Establishing direct causation is always complex, but the link is definitely there, likely involving inflammation and neurotransmitter disruption. And it's not just mood, is it? The long-term health stuff sounds really serious.
Yeah, tell me about that.
They are. That 2024 meta-analysis in The Lancet you mentioned was quite clear. A 30% increased risk of type 2 diabetes with high sugar intake.
30%? Wow.
Yeah, and that's largely down to insulin resistance developing.
Yeah.
Basically, your body cells just stop responding properly to insulin, so sugar hangs around in your blood.
Like the key doesn't fit the lock anymore.
Kind of, yeah. Locks get rusty. And that same Lancet study found a 25% higher risk of heart disease, probably from chronic inflammation, high triglycerides, and of course the link to obesity.
And then there's high fructose corn syrup specifically, HFCS. The materials seem to single that out as being particularly bad. Why is that?
Yeah, what's interesting there is how our bodies handle it differently. Unlike regular glucose, which cells all over can use, the fructose part of HFCS is mainly processed by the liver.
Okay.
So that puts a huge strain on the liver. It can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which the NIH said in 2023 affects a quarter of American adults. A quarter.
That's huge.
And the way fructose is metabolized, it seems to really encourage the buildup of visceral fat, that dangerous fat deep inside around your organ.
Right, not the stuff you can pinch.
Exactly. And that type of fat is really bad news. It's metabolically active, pumps out inflammatory stuff, and seriously ramps up the risk for metabolic syndrome.
So it's not just how much sugar, but the type of sugar really matters too.
Okay, let's shift to processed foods. Again, the amount we eat is staggering. What are the main worries with these foods?
Well, the big issue is they often pack a ton of calories, but offer very little real nutrition. That 2024 study, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, said 60% of our daily calories come from processed foods. 60%.
Unbelievable.
And they're usually loaded with unhealthy stuff. Trans fats from partially hydrogenated oils, even though they're mostly banned.
Mosley.
Yeah, they're loopholes for small amounts. Plus, excessive sodium, loads of artificial additives.
And the health consequences of those ingredients are pretty well known, aren't they? Even with the FDA ban on trans fats, there are still issues.
Absolutely. The ban was good, but those loopholes mean some still sneak in. And that 2023 study in Circulation still linked trans fat intake to a 34% higher risk of heart disease. It really messes with your cholesterol.
Okay.
Then there's sodium. We're averaging, 3,400 milligrams a day? The recommendation is 2,300.
Way over. And that's a major driver of high blood pressure, hypertension, which hits almost half of U.S. adults. And that, in turn, raises the risk for stroke, heart failure.
And it's not just heart health, right? The material also talk about gut health. That seems like a really growing area of research.
Oh, absolutely. The gut microbiome, all of those bacteria in our gut, is hugely important for overall health. Processed foods, typically low in fiber and sometimes high in processed meats, can really mess up that delicate balance.
How so?
Well, that 2024 study in Nature Microbiology showed this kind of diet can kill off beneficial bacteria, like bifidobacterium, and actually promote inflammation in the gut.
And chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
That's linked to all sorts of problems.
Exactly, including a higher risk of colorectal cancer, which is worryingly increasing in younger adults, people under 50.
That is worrying. And the lack of nutrients in processed foods, that creates another whole layer of problems, doesn't it?
Precisely. These foods are often stripped bare of essential vitamins, minerals. The NIH data you mentioned shows big chunks of the population are low in things like vitamin D, magnesium.
And that matters because
Those deficiencies have real consequences. Increased risk of osteoporosis, cardiovascular problems. The list goes on.
it seems like all of this, the sugar, the processed food, the lack of nutrients, is contributing to these alarming obesity rates we mentioned earlier.
No question. It's a direct line. The fact that over 42% of adults, nearly 20% of kids were obese in 2024. And projections hitting 50% of adults by 2030, it really feels like a national emergency.
And the link to major health risks is just undeniable. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, obesity seems to fuel them all.
It absolutely does. Obesity isn't just about weight. It dramatically increases the risk for these life-threatening conditions. And the dietary connection is crystal clear. Foods packed with calories but low in nutrients are driving it. That average of 2,500 calories a day, 500 more than generally recommended, is a key factor.
And specific foods got called out to red meat, refined grains. It's not just the calories with those, is it?
No, it's more complex. Red meat, while a protein source, is often high in saturated fat. That contributes to weight gain, sure, but also directly impacts heart disease risk.
Okay.
And refined grains, think white bread, pasta, white rice, they cause those rapid blood sugar spikes we talked about. That can lead to overeating because you get hungry again quickly. And it encourages the body to store excess energy as fat.
And the impact goes way beyond just individual health, doesn't it? The societal costs are enormous.
They really are. That $173 billion in healthcare costs tied to obesity just last year, that's a massive strain on the whole system.
Yeah.
And beyond the dollars, there's the reduced mobility, the workplace discrimination that many people dealing with obesity face. It really impacts quality of life.
So we've clearly established the problems. Now let's dig a bit deeper into why these eating patterns have such a profound effect. It's more than just weight gain, isn't it? Let's start with physical health. It sounds like a real domino effect.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. The high sugar and refined grains, they lead to that insulin resistance we mentioned,
Hmm.
which, as that 2024 diabetes care study showed, is tied to like 90% of type 2 diabetes cases. And that messes with your blood vessels, your organs.
Yeah.
It's a cascade.
Okay.
Similarly, the saturated and trans fats, they literally clog arteries with plaque, directly increasing heart attack and stroke risk. That 2023 BMJ analysis showed a clear benefit just replacing 5% of saturated fat calories with unsaturated ones lowered heart disease risk by 15%.
15% just from that small switch. And the connection to cancer through processed meats. The WHO classified them pretty seriously, right?
They did. Group 1 carcinogen. That's the same category as tobacco smoke and asbestos. It means there's strong evidence they cause cancer.
Wow.
And the 2024 Lancet Oncology study just reinforced that link, especially to colorectal cancer. Then there's the fiber issue. Most Americans get maybe 15 grams a day. We need more, like 25, 30.
And why does low fiber matter so much?
It devastates gut health. That 2024 gut study showed it leads to way less microbial diversity, fewer types of good bacteria, and that impacts inflammation levels throughout the body, even immunity. Even things like low vitamin C can compromise our defenses.
It's quite a sobering picture physically. But the source material also really stressed the link between diet and mental health. This whole gut-brain axis idea is fascinating.
It really is. We're learning so much more about how tightly the gut and brain communicate. A poor diet can actually disrupt the production of key neurotransmitters, like serotonin.
Feel-good chemical.
Exactly. And guess what? Something like 90% of it is made in the gut. So if your gut's unhappy because of a poor diet,
Your brain might feel it too.
precisely. That 2023 Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Review study pointed this out. It can contribute significantly to anxiety and depression, which affect millions of Americans.
That's incredible. Is it just the lack of nutrients, or does the sugar itself play a role mentally?
It seems sugar itself does too. That 2024 study in the American Journal of Psychiatry suggested high sugar intake can increase inflammation in the brain.
Brain inflammation. That sounds bad.
Yeah, it can impair cognitive function and increase the risk of mood disorders. They found a 25% increase. Plus, think about those energy crashes after a sugar rush. They leave you feeling irritable, fatigued.
Mm.
That impacts mood too.
It really is like our brains are being negatively affected. The material even used the phrase starving the brain.
Exactly. Our brains are hungry for nutrients. Omega-3 fatty acids, for example, vital for brain health, but something like 70% of Americans don't get enough.
And the consequences.
That 2024 neurology study linked low levels to a 15% higher risk of cognitive decline. Then there are B vitamins, often lost when grains are refined. They're crucial for neurotransmitter function.
Okay.
And the research on sugary drinks and dementia is really concerning. A 2024 study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease suggested a 20% higher risk with daily consumption. Think about our aging population. This is a huge potential issue.
This just drives home that what we eat isn't just about weight or avoiding a cold. It has these profound long-term effects on everything. Now, the material brought in Dr. Mark Hyman's insights. He seems like a really strong voice here challenging these norms.
He really is. Dr. Hyman, he's been a major figure in functional medicine for years, championing this idea of food as medicine. His work at the Cleveland Clinic, it's shown real potential to actually reverse chronic diseases through diet.
And he doesn't pull any punches, does he? Calling the American diet a toxic combination in that New York Times piece.
No, he's very direct. His research, the stuff he highlights in his books like Young Forever, it really shows the potential for change. He cites these incredible stats like a 30% drop in heart disease risk, a 60% reversal of type 2 diabetes within a year, just by switching to whole foods.
60% reversal.
Yeah.
And he pushes this pagan diet. Can you break that down quickly?
Yeah, it's basically a mix of paleo and vegan ideas. So lots and lots of plants, vegetables making up the bulk of the plate. Then moderate lean protein, healthy fats, and crucially, minimizing processed foods, grains, dairy.
Sounds like a pretty big departure from the standard American diet. And he's critical of the food industry too, right? Especially about hidden sugars.
Oh, very critical. He points out how the industry promotes unhealthy foods and makes it hard to even know how much sugar you're getting. That statistic, 70% of products have added sugar. That's wild.
70%.
Yeah. And he supports policies to counter this, like taxing sugary drinks. He points to places like Philadelphia, where consumption dropped after they introduced a tax.
It's definitely powerful hearing from experts like him. Now, the material also had that really compelling case study, Sarah Thompson, reversing her type 2 diabetes. That brings the science down to a human level.
It really does. Sarah's story is a fantastic example. Diagnosed high A1C, she made these major dietary shifts, cut out processed foods, sugary drinks, refined carbs, focused on whole foods.
And the results were pretty dramatic, weren't they?
Remarkable. Her A1C dropped significantly in just 3 months, off medication within 6. Plus, she felt better, more energy, stable mood, lost 30 pounds.
Wow.
Exactly. And her success, it mirrors what larger studies are finding, like that Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology study showing 60% remission rates for type 2 diabetes with whole foods diets. It shows these conditions aren't necessarily permanent. Diet can be incredibly powerful.
That's incredibly inspiring. And it kind of leads into the personal experiment documented in the material that week of eating healthy. This gives a relatable look at the challenges and benefits.
Right. Cutting out added sugars, processed stuff, red meat, refined grains for a whole week. That's a big change for most people.
So what were the main takeaways from that experiment?
Well, the day-by-day notes showed initial adjustment, maybe some cravings, but pretty quickly the person reported more stable energy, less of those afternoon slumps, improved mood, feeling less bloated. By day 5, better focus. By the end of the week, consistent energy, stable mood, no digestive issues, even some weight loss. Reduced waist size, better mental clarity.
And the numbers track that too, right? Calorie intake, nutrients.
Yeah, they tracked it. Average calories dropped, but nutrient intake went up, hit the fiber goals, got plenty of fruits and veggies, sodium went down, and the self-reported stuff, like a 40% improvement in energy, 30% more stable mood. Even if subjective, that's pretty telling.
But it wasn't all easy, was it? The experiment also pointed out some real barriers.
Absolutely. Cost was a big one. Fresh whole foods often cost more than processed staples.
Mm-hmm.
Time commitment was another. Cooking from scratch takes longer than grabbing convenience food, about an hour and a half a day in this case.
Yes, that's significant.
And then there's accessibility. Not everyone lives near a store with affordable fresh produce. Food deserts are a real problem, affecting millions of Americans.
Those are really important points. It's not just about willpower. There are bigger systemic things at play. So, okay, if we know the problems and the barriers, what about solutions? The material laid out ideas at different levels, individual, community, policy. What can individuals do?
Well, on the individual level, adopting a framework like Dr. Hyman's Pagan diet could be a start, or just focusing on whole foods generally. Reading labels is huge, actively looking for and avoiding added sugars, trans fats, crazy amounts of sodium. That survey mentioned showed label readers cut their sugar intake by 20%.
Just by being aware.
Exactly. Meal prepping can also make a big difference, saving time and often money during the week. And using tools like nutrition apps can help track intake and make better choices. One study showed they improved diet quality by about 15%.
Okay, so individual actions matter. What about community initiative? How can communities support healthier eating?
Things like farmers markets are great. They've increased by 10% recently and often have cheaper produce. Community gardens, too. Detroit saw 15% growth. These increase access to fresh food.
Yeah.
Nutrition education programs are key, too. Teaching cooking skills, healthy budgeting. Chicago's Eat Well, Live Well program apparently boosted veggie consumption by 25%. And improving school lunch programs makes a difference for kids long term.
And finally, policy changes. What needs to happen at a bigger scale?
Well, policy can really shape the environment. Taxing sugary drinks, we saw the examples in Philly and Berkeley, where soda purchases dropped 30%.
That's substantial.
Yeah. Subsidizing healthy foods could make them more affordable. That Massachusetts pilot saw a 40% increase in consumption when they offered discounts. Regulating food marketing, especially ads aimed at kids, is crucial. Quebec's ban on kids' ads was linked to a 10% drop in childhood obesity.
Wow, we spend billions marketing unhealthy food, right?
Billions. About 80% of food marketing dollars go towards unhealthy products. And finally, actively addressing food deserts, funding initiatives to get grocery stores into underserved areas. That USDA program evaluation showed a 15% increase in fruit and veggie intake where new stores opened.
These are all really important pieces of the puzzle. It's definitely a multifaceted problem needing a multi-pronged solution. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, all these shocking truths, what's the main takeaway?
I think the key message is, yes, the current picture is concerning. The health consequences are serious, but change is absolutely possible. The science is clear. We have real-world examples. It's not hopeless.
We've covered a lot: the impact of sugar, processed foods, obesity rates, Dr. Hyman's insights, Sarah's inspiring story, that week-long experiment, and these potential solutions.
Exactly. And it's worth remembering, I think, that even small, consistent changes can really add up over time. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight.
So for you, the listener, reflecting on all this, maybe consider, what's one small change you could make, starting today, that might nudge you towards a healthier relationship with food? And what kind of ripple effect could that single change have on your well-being down the line? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.